How can you become a winsome apologist on YouTube? This is a great question, and one I hope to offer some insights from things I've learned along the way, including a lot of mistakes, to help you equip believers and engage non believers through the medium of social media. As we start, realize I don't pretend to have this all figured out. I am in process. There's people who do this much better than I do, but here's some lessons I've learned that I hope will encourage and equip you to do apologetics and evangelism on social media. Well, let's jump in. Before we get to some practical things, really what I hope to do in this session is talk about how Jesus would use social media, talk about a little bit of the platforms that I use and why, and just give some practical tips about how to be more effective at using social media today. So let's jump in and just start with a question. Would Jesus even use social media? Now, quite obviously, we can't turn to a passage in one of the Gospels in which Jesus uses social media. That's almost so obvious, I shouldn't have mentioned it. But the question is, are there principles in the Gospels and the life of Jesus that would tell us if he might communicate this way, and if so, how Jesus might communicate? And I think there are. Now, why would I say such a thing? Well, number one, just look at the way that Jesus communicated. I thought about writing a whole book on the communication of Jesus because it's brilliant. For example, he would go out and preach on a boat to people on the shore. Why? To project his voice. Jesus would speak on a hill. Why? That also projects his voice. In fact, when I was in Israel, we walked where the Sermon on the Mount was likely practiced, and I walked way down the hill, and I had my group stay up top, and I said, I'm going to speak in a regular voice. Can you hear me? And it echoed kind of up the hill, and a significant group of people a far amount away could hear it. So if we study the communication of Jesus, it seems that he was willing to use some of the means and mechanisms that were available his way to teach and preach and spread the gospel. So while there's a lot of questions about which social medium Jesus might use, I think it's fair to say that Jesus was eager and willing to be an effective communicator, and then we can apply some of those principles to how we think about social media. Now, how did Jesus communicate, by the way? He did a few things. And when we get to specific ways to use social media, I think you'll find that some of these overlap. Well, one thing that Jesus did primarily is he told stories. Jesus told stories. He didn't give 3-point sermons. He told stories. Have you ever really thought about why? Why did he choose to communicate that way? Well, one reason is we love stories, don't we? We love stories. We are wired in a way, I think biologically and relationally, to enjoy stories. But second, we also remember stories, don't we? One of my friends is a communication professor at Biola, talked to me about how he did a study on when people listen to a message, the amount that they remember, say an hour later, 24 hours later, a week later, decreases. But the key things that people remember are stories. That's why Jesus communicated with stories. But third, stories rivet us, don't they? I mean, there's something about stories that just grab us in. When I'm speaking and giving a talk, I know that if I'm getting lost in exegesis or historical point, and I can see the audience kind of starting to fade, especially if it's students, I start to tell a story, and what happens? It's like there's this power, like the Force almost, where people will turn and they'll start to focus. Stories rivet us. Even my 12th graders, when I was teaching high school Bible for years, occasionally I'd say, I write a story time, and I read them a story, a kid's book, actually, like the Giving Tree, which has a brilliant message behind it. And they'd sit around, and these kids actually loved it. So Jesus told stories because they rivet us. But fourth, we retell stories, don't we? When we hear a good story, we tell it to somebody else. Just think about your life and the way you've communicated in the past day or week. How many stories have you retold from other people? Chances are it's quite a few. And last, stories are persuasive. Jesus used stories because they're persuasive. They change the way we think and see the world. So when Jesus was asked the question, who is my neighbor? He doesn't explain it like, hey, your neighbor, A, B, and C. He tells a story about, of course, the Good Samaritan. That's who your neighbor is. You see, it's really interesting. When we go to watch a sermon, for example, we know someone's preaching at us, so we filter it through the sense that someone's trying to get a message across. But if we watch a movie, although it's filled with messages, what happens? Our defenses go down. Whenever somebody says, hey, let me just tell you a story, what happens? They can be persuaded and they can be influenced, but defenses go down. It seems like the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, people talked about like subliminal messages in advertising. And then we realized the science that doesn't change people. What does change people is stories. So you look at commercials, what happens? Commercials are really stories. It's not just facts about toothpaste. It's somebody using a certain toothpaste, having a good smile, and getting the job or getting the date. So Jesus told stories because stories are persuasive. And what's amazing is on different forms of social media, it's oftentimes stories. TikTok videos are quick stories. On Instagram, people tell stories. YouTube, people often use YouTube to tell a story. So when we think about social media, we're going to come back to this, but realize an effective way is to tell stories in that form, because that's how Jesus communicated. Another thing Jesus did is he asked a lot of questions, didn't he? Think about, there's over 300 questions recorded that Jesus asked. For example, perhaps one of the most important questions he said was, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Jesus said, why does a generation seek a sign? How can Satan cast out Satan? Even God, the Father, in Genesis, when he speaks with Adam and Eve, he asks some questions. Who told you that you were naked? He communicated with them through questions. So I think we have good reason to believe that Jesus may have used certain forms of communication, such as social media, but he would have been thoughtful. He would have been strategic in how he did so, and we're going to get into that. Now, before we get into certain kind of steps that might help you a little bit, let me just tell you a few of the social media platforms that I use and why. Now, with this said, I'm not saying you should use these necessarily. I'm not saying there's not questions about these. There are. Each one of these platforms, I understand that there's some reasons why people may not use them, and there's some concern that I'm aware of behind them that I'm calculating as I go. Someday I might switch. One reason I use different platforms is if one gets shut down, I want to have another platform available. But realize I'm not telling you you should use these. I'm just going to tell you about the ones that I use and a little bit of the reasons behind it. So for me, one I'll start with is this happened during the pandemic, I don't know, about a year ago, maybe longer than that. My 17-year-old son, he must have been 15 or 16 at the time. He goes, Dad, if you want to reach my generation, you need to get on TikTok. Well, anytime one of my teenage kids tells me something about reaching their generation, I listen. So I said, okay, tell me about that. He goes, Dad, my friends are on TikTok. They spend time, they engage it. We need more voices. Find a way to use TikTok. I thought, well, if my son is on it, and I started paying attention, it's now become one of the leading platforms and apps that people use. Does it make sense that some Christians should be on there? Is there negative, bad content on there? 100%. That's unavoidable. But I've engaged with Mormons who are trying to disciple and evangelize on TikTok, Muslims who are trying to evangelize on TikTok, atheists, progressive Christians. So I felt like, given it was being used so commonly, I was going to start using TikTok. Now, I don't do dance videos. I have a philosophy about TikTok. Right now, I probably post 3 videos a week, and I just answer quick questions. And now and then I do fun ones on shoes or basketball or comics just to relate and show a human side. But I've had a positive feedback and experience on TikTok. There's a lot of people there who've watched my content and then gone over to YouTube, picked up a book, followed me on other platforms. So that's a platform that I use, and I have a strategy. Am I saying you should use it again? Not necessarily, but I think we should have some Christians engage in that platform creatively. Second is I use Twitter. Now I realize that Twitter also comes with some baggage related to Twitter, but here's what I do. I actually get in the morning and I follow a whole bunch of different blogs, probably dozens, if not maybe 100 or a couple hundred now by now. And I read articles, and then I use an app called Buffer that buffers them every 3 or 4 hours throughout the day. So I get on in the morning, I spend maybe 30 minutes a day, sometimes 40 minutes. It's my way of reading the news, seeing what people are saying, trying to engage what conversation is happening. And then I buffer it again. And then what happens is I use the app called Feedly to follow different blogs. And then I link Buffer to it. And then say 9 in the morning, noon, 4 o'clock, and 7 o'clock, these different articles go out throughout the day. Most days I'm able to do that. And I just look for articles that are helpful to people. So as I look at Twitter, my goal is to equip Christians and engage non-Christians. My platform is Christian worldview and apologetics and evangelism. So if I see an article that's helpful or provocative, I'll repost it. And so I've been on that platform, I don't know how many years, but have developed a significant or decent following. Now, for me, as I think about it, some people I know, like J. Warner Wallace, are one way. He communicates, he doesn't engage comments. That's a discipline that he's had. I think there's some other people who spend a lot of time engaging content and comments, and you can get lost there. I'm probably about 90-10. I spend about 90% speaking, and then I occasionally respond back if I think I can be helpful to somebody. But that's a medium I use, and I love and hate it. There's a downside to Twitter. It can be an echo chamber, but I found it helpful, and a lot of people are on there, so I've engaged that platform. Third platform that I choose to use is Instagram. And what I like about Instagram is obviously tied to Facebook Meta. There's a huge reach through it, and I will do Reels, which are short videos. I'll use a lot of images. Like, for example, I pull things from, say, a book, like Evidence That Demands a Verdict. 5 reasons the tomb is empty, and I make 5 different slides that people kind of scroll through. You can look on Instagram and see how those work if that's helpful. But really, quotes, and I add to that some fun family things now and now, just because Instagram, I'm trying to show a human side. So some people will create a personal account and a business account. For sake of time and simplicity, I blend them together. It's probably 75% content, then occasionally a picture with my wife, picture my kids playing sports, just showing a personalized side of who I am. I've gotten good hits on some of the Reels, which are short videos there. The fourth one I use, and this is it, is YouTube. Now, YouTube in some ways is not just a kind of social media, but it is, on one hand, a kind of social media. And one of the reasons I engage this is it is the second largest search engine behind Google. I think if not in the US, in the world. It's massive. And Google owns both of them. So I started to realize how much time young people and others are spending on platforms such as YouTube, and thought, I've got to engage this. Now on YouTube, some people do longer form videos. Some people do short videos. Some people do response videos. Part of me was to say, I'm going to use TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram for more shorter, quick content. But YouTube, while I do short videos there, I also post a lot of longer interviews. That's my goal on YouTube. Now, what I want to do is just model spiritual conversations with people. So with many Christians, but I've also had on some atheists. I've had on I've had on Mormons. I've had conversations with progressive Christians. And I have a whole philosophy behind how I approach YouTube. But for me, it's largely worked. And my goal is to equip Christians, but second, also to engage non-believers. And I've had quite a few atheists contact me, tell me they watch the channel. I've had a handful of people who are trans say that they watch it. People of all political persuasions. It's a massive, massive platform. Now, with that said, if you want to understand how I approach YouTube, I actually interviewed Mike Winger, who I think is one of the best YouTube Apologist. I think the title is just called How to Be a YouTube Apologist. It was probably 6 or 12 months ago. And we walk through very particular things. Like what can generate hits is the kind of thumbnail that you use, the way you title a video, when you release a video, the description. It's not just having good content, but it's packaging it in a way that people will click on and will also resonate with YouTube's metrics and analytics. So if that's helpful, that's an hour-long video. We go into some depth. Mike Winger is a pastor who's an apologist. He's one of the best. He does it really, really well. That would be a video that would be helpful. Now, with this said, here's a key principle that I've taken away. It's tempting to just take content and then recycle it on all of these different channels. But I've learned that people know, and even the metrics know, that if you're just recycling something and leaving. So, for example, I'll do a short video. Sometimes I'll do it through TikTok, and I might put it on Instagram. I might put it on Twitter. I might make it a short on YouTube. There is some overlap there, but I'm careful to make sure that people on those platforms don't feel like I'm just throwing content on them and dumping, and that I'm trying to at least engage at some, respond to some comments. And when people look on Instagram and they see, oh, it's just a quote from Twitter or it's just a TikTok video, if that's all you do, then people will start to wonder, why don't I just follow you on TikTok? It's okay to do that now and then, but as best as you can, don't just recycle content across different platforms if you want to be most effective. Also, I would say, there's different philosophies about using different social media. So for example, some friends of mine really just do YouTube. They have a massive, significant YouTube following. And they're like, I'm not doing TikTok. I'm not even going to do Twitter. I don't do Instagram. There's something to be said for having one channel and doing it well. You can dilute yourself if you try to reach everybody. So it's kind of like the Lego movie that said, everything is awesome. I told my son, I'm like, if everything is awesome, then nothing is awesome. You can only have something awesome if there's things that are not awesome. Don't spread yourself too thin. And this is in terms of resources. This is in terms of effectiveness. It's also in terms of your own energy. What motivates you and what drives you. If it starts affecting your effectiveness elsewhere, then maybe pull back. You've got to care for your emotional health. But just realize people have different philosophies, and I found positive feedback on those different channels, and I found it's worth it. But I'm always reconsidering this and may start another or stop one if I felt it was more effective. Now, let's jump in a little bit to maybe how Jesus would use social media to be a little bit more practical. Well, here's what we know he wouldn't do. Jesus wouldn't use social media to shame people. Jesus would not use social media to shame people. Now, Jesus was firm at times, and he spoke truth, but he actually tried to show honor to people many times who were shamed by culture. So when I see Christians using this to shame people, and again, there may be a time and place to do this, but there must be a lot of wisdom and steps taken before that. Jesus would not go out of his way to shame people unnecessarily. Second, Jesus wouldn't use social media just to win an argument. That's not his goal. Now, keep in mind, Jesus argued with people. He wasn't argumentative, but he argued with people. Read John 5 through 8. I mean, what does Jesus do? He is debating back and forth with the religious leaders very firmly, and he says some strong things to them. But his point wasn't just to win an argument for the sake of winning an argument. Sometimes I see Christians lost and saying, I'm going to win this argument. I'm going to prove you wrong. And I think, what's the point of this? Is it to prove that you're right? I think on social media, sometimes Jesus would just turn the other cheek and let something go. So he wouldn't use it to unnecessarily shame people. He wouldn't use it to win an argument for the sake of winning an argument. And he wouldn't use it to grow a following just for the sake of growing a following. Now, of course, Jesus had 12 disciples and wanted his message to get to the world because he's God in human flesh and he was bringing us salvation. So I understand he had a very strategic way of training disciples and sending them out. But it wasn't just for the sake of getting subscribers or followers, right? That should not be our goal. And it's easy to start looking at social media that way. I think we can do this in the church. We can just look at numbers and start to value people based on numbers. I don't think Jesus, if he used social media, would just grow a following for the sake of growing following. It would be embedded within his mission and within his goal very thoughtfully. He also wouldn't virtue signal. He wouldn't say, I just want to show everybody I'm on the right side of this issue. That would not be how Jesus would approach social media. So how would Jesus actually use social media if he did so? Well, here's one thing I know. Jesus had a very clear mission statement. He knew who he was, and he knew why he came. Everything he did, from picking his 12 disciples, where he traveled, the stories he told, the way he communicated, was based on his mission that he came to advance and bring in the kingdom of God. So my question is, what's your mission statement for how you want to use social media? What's your goal? Now, for me, my primary goal is discipleship with a secondary goal of evangelism. I want to disciple Christians to be grounded in their faith, and I want to model for Christians how to talk about and how to treat non-believers and how to have spiritual conversations. Whether the different social media platform, and in particular that's really on YouTube, this is what I try to model. And I probably have more Christians than non-believers engage my stuff, but quite a few non-believers do. If my primary goal was evangelism, I would probably approach things a little bit differently. I'm not saying one is better than the other. We need both. But for you, as you think about engaging social media, you might write down a mission statement or at least a bullet point. This is my audience. And I would be specific. Is it somebody in a certain country? Is a certain age? As specific as you can be helps you when you think about posting something on social media. The question is always, does this advance my mission or not? If it doesn't, don't post it. If it does, post it. That's the best way, I think, to approach this. So start by just coming up with a mission statement. Now, for me, I talk about controversial issues, but I don't engage politics in the sense that I don't say you should vote Democrat, you should vote Libertarian, you should vote Republican. Now, I will talk about political issues that engage worldview issues. I will discuss them. So, of course, I've talked about issues of sexuality. I've had somebody on to talk about gun control. I will talk about issues. I had a guest on a while ago to talk about the environment, like those, because they're worldview issues. My goal is to approach these through a biblical lens. And so people who come to my channel know that I'm not going to try to tell them to vote a certain way. They're not going to see a post from me on Instagram. Now, are there Christians who do that? That's fine. That's between you and the Lord. I'm not telling you shouldn't do this. But my goal is to disciple Christians and to do evangelism. And so I avoid certain topics such as politics, because I think when it's all said and done, it gets in the way of me being more effective. So let's talk a little bit more what Jesus might do. I think what he would do, based on what we said earlier, is I think he'd ask a lot of questions. I actually watch Christians comment on social media. I look at posts, and more often than not, we make statements which probably make ourselves feel good. And then others will comment and say, yeah, I'm with you. And somehow it makes us feel good, but it's not as effective. I think Jesus would ask a lot of questions if he used social media. He would do a post that provokes. He would do a video that provokes. He would do some kind of social media, whatever it is, whatever the medium is, he would ask a question. Now, I think of the story of Rosaria Butterfield, who's a former, I believe she was an atheist or kind of agnostic lesbian professor. And years ago, she wrote a review of Promise Keepers and critiqued it. And almost all the responses were super positive, or some Christians were super, super critical. And a pastor wrote her a letter. And in this letter, he just asked some simple questions like, hey, I really appreciate this. So he found common ground. And then he goes, hey, here's some questions I have for you. I'm wondering why you approach it this way. How would you answer this? Can you help me understand? And Rosaria didn't quite know what to do with this. She was tempted to throw it out. She put it in a box, and it just sat there for a long time. But it was the fact that he wasn't dogmatic. He just asked a question that provoked her. So I would encourage you to think about whatever social media platform you use, whether it's posting something positively, commenting on somebody else's, commenting on your own, asking questions. Ask questions to people. One reason we don't is I think we feel better by just crossing every T and dotting every I and telling people what to believe. But the question we have to ask ourselves is that the most effective way to communicate? As we talked about earlier, Jesus asked over 300 questions. How many questions have you asked recently on social media? Second thing is Jesus, I think, would engage those with a small following. When we get on social media, it's very easy to start kind of gauging people or judging people based upon the number of subscribers or followers. That can be a kind of favoritism where we treat people differently. The Bible has a lot to say about favoritism. You look in the New Testament, it's like, don't treat the rich better than you do the poor, because all are made in the image of God. I think if Jesus were on social media, he wouldn't just judge people that way. He wouldn't just spend his time on those with the biggest numbers. Jesus said, leave the 99 and go to the one. So I do approach social media, and I want to reach as many people as I can. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't want to lose caring for individuals in the midst of how I approach social media. Now, I can't respond to every individual. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes I miss it. But I do my best to engage people on an individual level, because behind every single tweet, every single Instagram comment, even though people are anonymous at times, by the way, it's a human being. It's somebody made in the image of God. And I don't want to lose the individual if I can engage him just by looking at the numbers. I mean, look at Jesus. He engaged the poor. He cared for the sick. Children came to him, and the culture around him was like, why are you talking to children? Women, the story about the woman on the road to Samaria that he cared for. People that were all, the poor, the blind. The society was like, they don't have value. Don't focus on them. Our society values big numbers, big platform. Jesus wouldn't have valued people that way. So, yes, try to reach as many people as you can. But don't think if you don't have a huge platform that you're not making a significant difference. A friend of mine who had a chance to interview recently on my YouTube channel, Jonathan McClatchy, recently started a website called talkaboutdoubts.com. Now, what he does is he's put together a team of, I think, 30 or 40 leading scholars in the world. And when Christians write in and say they have doubts, he sets up Zoom calls, 30 minutes to an hour, and listens to them, tries to answer their questions, counsels them, pairs them with someone. If their doubts are in science, Dr. Stephen Meyer will take some time, if he's available, to talk with them personally. So his approach was seeing all these deconstruction stories and said, I can't stop all of them, but I'm going to reach out to the one. And he uses social media to try to draw people to this resource. So I think Jesus would engage those with a small following. Third thing Jesus would do is he would speak truth clearly and boldly. He would not hesitate to speak truth. So yes, he's compassionate. Yes, we should be winsome apologists. But Jesus also told people that were whitewashed tombs. He talked about repentance. He talked about judgment. Jesus talked a lot about hell. Now, he did it in a wise, careful way. But you could even make the case at times he wasn't being winsome when he told people, eat my flesh and drink my blood. And all these people walk away. He was kind of shocking them in a sense. Now, the way Jesus did, of course, has wisdom, and we always have to look at the context. So I think we should be winsome, but we shouldn't be winsome at the expense of speaking truth clearly and boldly. Now, for me, I talk about controversial issues. I mentioned that I don't go into politics, and that's largely because I think that will sidetrack away of the effectiveness of what I do. But I speak about issues of pro-life. I've had somebody on my YouTube channel who's an abortion survivor, and I put clips of that on all of my other social media platforms. I talk about issues related to sexuality. I talk about some controversial topics. I try to do it with grace. I try to do it with love, but I also am not going to shy away from speaking truth. Now, with that said, there's a trade-off, and you got to be careful, is on TikTok, if you directly address homosexuality in a critical way, good chance you'll be shadow banned and kicked off. It's not the case as much on Twitter, although some posts might get kind of de-emphasized. That's not the case that I've experienced on YouTube, although on YouTube it might be demonetized, so you don't get money simply from advertising. So I just try to look at those with wisdom and say, okay, is it worth getting my channel blocked on TikTok to not speak about this? Maybe on that channel I will address homosexuality in a relational, generous way. People watch it and then invite people then to go engage my longer form videos on YouTube in which I talk about those issues in some real depth. Now, I realize there's questions of free speech and not being silenced. I understand all of that. I'm trying to play within the system for effectiveness. But I'm always asking myself, am I stopping speaking truth because of that? That's a very careful thing to keep in mind and just manage. So speak truth, but do it wisely with a big goal in mind. Jesus would have spoken truth. Now, a fourth thing Jesus would do is he would be motivated by love. Now, that seems obvious, but Jesus would be motivated by love. Think about Zacchaeus. People had every reason to think he should not be reaching out to Zacchaeus. Think about Mark chapter 2 when he was eating with sinners and tax collectors. He wanted to show love to people. That's his goal. You see, love is other-focused. It's other-focused. That's what Jesus did. Sometimes on social media, it can become self-focused. Platform for me. Look at me. Jesus spoke through love. So when we're on social media, we have to ask ourselves, what is the most way to show the greatest love to another person? When I see Christians doing mean comments, that just shuts down conversation. So Jesus would be motivated by love. And the last thing is Jesus might surprise us who he engaged. He might surprise us who he engaged. People were upset Jesus talked with sinners. Mark chapter 2, that he talked with Zacchaeus. So Jesus might surprise us. I've had a few guests on and taken flack at time on my YouTube channel, and I've put posts, but I want to reach out of my comfort zone and engage people with a different worldview and show them that Christians are different. That Christians can be gracious, Christians can be thoughtful, and maybe break down some barriers so these people might consider the claims of Christ. Now, that said, here's just some practical things that might help you do social media better. Some things that I do. Number one, I watch people who do it well, and I take notes. That's it. So I watch people who are good on Twitter. I'm like, wow, they're getting a lot of engagement. That's a smart way to engage people. And I just copy it. I don't rip off their content, but I like their approach. So whenever I'm on, say, Twitter or Instagram, I'm watching people who do it. And if I see someone do it well, I might say, you know what? I'm going to learn and I'm going to copy them. So think about on YouTube, for example. Ray Comfort has a huge channel. You might agree with this approach to evangelism. You might not. But at Living Waters, they go do evangelism live and they videotape it. So there's drama built in, and that's a very effective way to get people to engage the content. Frank Turk is amazing. He does live Q&A on university campuses, posts those Q&As, so there's drama built in, and people watch it. Mike Winger's a former pastor. He is very good, gives long-form videos. Very effective in how he approaches it. I watch all of them and learn from them. So watch people. Second, find your lane and stick to it. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but on each social media platform, who are you trying to reach and stick in that lane? So my lane is I want to speak truth, but I want to do it graciously and I want to do it lovingly. Do I fail all the time? Yes. We'll delete a tweet and move on. But I think the further I've gone, I've narrowed down my lane of who I am and how I want to engage. Figure out what your lane is, so to speak. Somebody really good at this is J. Warner Wallace. J. Warner Wallace, former atheist who's a cold case detective, knows what he posts on and he sticks with it. Third, be consistent. Be consistent. To build anything on social media, it's going to take consistency over time. It's no longer top down. It's going to be bottom up, unless you're a rock star or an athlete or a politician. It's going to be take over time. So I did a response video to this atheist guy. It must have been a year and a half ago, maybe more. And it took me probably 8 hours. I posted it. I think it got about 6,000 views. I was pretty excited about that. And a YouTuber reached out to me and goes, "Hey, Sean, good job. Now do it again. And then do it again. And then do it again." And I realized if I'm going to build a platform and influence people, you're going to have to do it a lot. Another point is bring value to people. This is where Christian principles apply. I'm always thinking, how do I love my neighbor? So I love people on Twitter by bringing value that helps them. I don't just post stupid stuff that I think won't bring value. Now, maybe if you see me on social media, you think that's not valuable. I'm sure I fall short, but that's the principle. Oh, that's an article. That's helpful. Here's a conference. That's helpful. Here's an answer to a quick question. That's helpful. Here's a resource. That's helpful. All of what I post is meant to be helpful, because if people come across your social media and they don't feel like they're going to get something from it, and sometimes that might just be a laugh, they will move on. So we should be loving people by bringing value to them. Another point, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to fail. You are going to make mistakes. I've taken tweets down. I've taken some YouTube videos down. I've made plenty of mistakes. And frankly, I've made some live on YouTube. I was live with a leading New Testament scholar and the sound was messing up and we went 10 minutes into it. I was totally embarrassed, but I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. Then I'm going to get it right the next time. I had President Corey on from Biola University and he kept cutting off because his Wi-Fi was bad. Eventually, I literally held up the phone and I'm like, here he is on Skype and I'm doing it live. It was lame. I left it up for a while. People enjoyed it, but I've made mistakes. And sometimes I fear doing this social media stuff, but I just got to step out, got to do it, be willing to make a mistake and learn from it. The other thing is just commit to getting better over time. One of the things I've learned is at first I was like, I just need a good microphone. And then 6 months later, I'm like, you know what? I can get a better microphone. You actually see behind me, this is a new camera I just got. Eventually invested in a nice camera. If you want to be good on social media, you're never going to just arise and get comfortable because the metrics in social media might change. There might be a new platform. You're going to have to get used to consistently changing and learning over time. Another point is don't sacrifice integrity for hits. It's so easy to play the game where you're trying to get too many hits on social media. So for me, a trade-off, I always think, what's a good title, even if it's a tweet or an Instagram video or a TikTok video? What's a title that will entice people appropriately or is not unnecessarily provocative? If the title says alarming or shocking or never happened before, probably too much clickbait. Don't sacrifice your integrity or your message to try to get more hits. It's a very thin line, but be careful. That's why having a mission statement and a goal and others working with you can help accomplish this. Finally, here's what my approach is. I think of social media as fishing for people. That's really what I do. Think about Jesus said, I want to make you fishers of men or fishers of people. That's how I look at social media. So here's just a couple ways to kind of wrap up with. Is why I often ask myself, why did Jesus speak in parables? One way is people remember and relate to parables, a kind of story that we talked about. But I think another reason why is Jesus was weeding out people who were only there for the show, who were there for the drama, who were there for lunch. And then his apostles and a few others would come to him afterwards and say, like, what did you mean by the parable of the sower? And he would explain it. It's almost like he was making truth somewhat hard to engage, not trying to please everybody, but was fishing in a sense to figure out who really wants to know truth. I think of Paul on Mars Hill. What does he do? He goes and he speaks a message. And some people wrote him off, but it says a handful of people said, "We want to hear you again." And some women and a few others came to believe. So a lot of people heard him, but a few people came to believe, and he followed up with and engaged those. So when I'm thinking about a tweet, when I'm thinking about an Instagram post, I'm always trying to think I'm fishing for those who need encouragement. I'm fishing for those who maybe at that time are open to the gospel. And if I see a comment that feels like those who came to Jesus and Paul and said, "Hey, we want to learn more," then I engage those people. Friends, we live in a crazy time where there's a lot of ways to communicate. I would encourage you to really consider using social media to advance the gospel. There's ways to do it well, there's ways to do it not so well. I hope this video has been encouragement to you. God bless in your efforts to equip Christians and reach the lost.